The anime begins with Touka Mimori, who is a pathetic, disgusting loser for not eating his meal. He pleads and apologizes repeatedly, but his mother pays him no attention and leads him to the mercy of his stepfather's feet. He suddenly wakes up on a bus, as Sogo Ayaka, the class president, tells Shogo Oyamata to give back her novel. He makes fun of her reading preferences, surprised that she's actually into romance novels despite leading people to believe otherwise. She asks him if there's a problem with her choices and he belittles her, saying he could never read something like that because his brain cells will evaporate. While the scuffle is going on, Takao Hijiri notices that Takao Itsuki, her younger sister, is lost in the mountain scenery outside, but she tells her to pay more attention to what's happening on the bus. Ayaka tells Oyamata to give back her novel, since he isn't interested in it, but he's reluctant to grant her wish. He asks for her social media handle in return for the novel, but she declined his request. The bus was taking the class on their field trip, and while the banter between the president and Oyamata was going on, Touka considered stepping in. Still, he realized he would be too insignificant to do anything effective. He decides to remain indifferent. Just like the Takao sisters and their class teacher, Ayaka asks Oyamata to give back her novel once again, but he insists that she must share her social media handle with him before she can get back her novel. Ayaka remains persistent when Touka suddenly gets up, telling Oyamata to give back her novel. While Oyamata was surprised that Touka stood up for Ayaka, Touka was even more surprised to see himself standing because he didn't know when his body moved on impulse. Oyamata recognizes him, but wonders what gave him the guts to tell him what to do. Touka tries to reason with Oyamata, telling him to give back Ayaka's novel because she's getting annoyed by his mischief. Oyamata laughs off the Touka's show of chivalry, and he wonders where he suddenly got the confidence from. Takuto Kurihara, one of the class elites, tells Oyamata to return Ayaka's novel, but Oyamata, for some support in putting Touka in his place, Takuto tells him he has no interest in such frivolities, and Oyamata is jealous of Takuto's cool aura. Takuto tells him he can ignore Touka, but he must give back Ayaka's novel because it doesn't sit right with him. Asagi Senjo commends Takuto for stepping up for Ayaka, as Oyamata hands over the novel to her. Other students silently commend Takuto for being so nice despite being an elite student. Oyamata takes his seat behind Yasu Tomohiro and he begins kicking his chair from behind, questioning him about what gave Touka the audacity to stand up to him. Yasu quivers in fear, apologizing for his earlier actions, but the teacher cuts in, telling him to quit bothering Yasu. Touka was also surprised that he had the confidence to stand up to Oyamata, and he concluded that his dream was the cause because it put him on edge. While Oyamata complains about his grand moment being ruined by Touka, the goddess chants an incantation which suddenly teleports all the students to a hall. They wonder if they're in some kind of dream, as they all suddenly appear in an unknown location. Goddess Vicious addresses them, welcoming them as heroes to alien her kingdom. She informs them that heroes are summoned to fight the great demon emperor anytime he appears. The demon emperor was once defeated 200 years ago by the combined efforts of heroes, but he was recently resurrected again, prompting the need for the summoning of new heroes. The goddess begs the new heroes from other worlds for their strength to take down such a big threat to her kingdom's prosperity. The students still have a hard time wrapping their heads around what the goddess is trying to say. Their teacher suddenly calms them down, reassuring them that everything will be alright since he's with them. Though he doesn't fully understand their present predicament, he tells them they need to pay attention to whatever the goddess says for clarity. The goddess thanks him for that and he smiles sheepishly, trying to get into her good books. Touka looks around, noting the stone walls, the old-fashioned bonfires, the armored soldiers, and the features of the goddess. Despite all he could see, he still wasn't convinced that they were in another world. Takuto wonders what will happen if they refuse to cooperate, and she tells them that they're stuck there regardless because she can't take them back to their world. Takuto asks her if there's a way back, and she tells them that it can only be done through the reverse summoning event, which requires a special magic element called the evil element. This element can only be obtained from the heart of the great demon emperor or the absorbance of the elements released when the emperor perishes into a special necklace. Oyamata is pissed, wondering what the demon emperor has to do with them because they're from another. The goddess gets on her knees, begging them to act as heroes and become the messiah of everyone in her kingdom. Ayaka explains to the goddess that they can't be as much help even if she considers them their messiah, because they're just humans. The goddess tells them they have power as no other humans have, and Touka suddenly feels a strange tingling sensation. She explains that the powers were bestowed upon them as she summoned them to her world, but Oyamata doesn't believe her, and he tells her to stop playing pranks on them. The goddess orders her guard to release a demon wolf on a prisoner, which it wastes no time devouring. She then takes out the wolf using a fireball spell, which surprises everyone. The students are now convinced that they're in an entirely different world than the one they're used to. The goddess asks them to approach a crystal ball individually so their skills can be revealed to them. Each student approaches the ball and their magic powers are appraised, but when Oyamata approaches the ball and places his hand on it, it gives off a bright red color, which surprises the mages. Oyamata is so impressed with his skills shown off by the crystal that he decides to accept his inevitable role as the messiah of the new world. Takuto walks up to the crystal ball to measure his magic abilities, but the crystal ball gets so overloaded that it breaks. The goddess praises him for being an S-rank hero and Oyamata runs over to her, wondering what rank he's in. She informs him that he is an A-rank hero, and he's disappointed that he couldn't outclass Takuto. Ayaka steps up to test her magic skills, and she also breaks the crystal ball, earning the S-rank. Hijiri follows suit, breaking the crystal and also earning the S-rank qualification. The goddess is amazed at the luck she had in just one summoning ritual, because getting an S-rank hero is very rare, but she managed to get 3 at once. Touka steps up to test his abilities, but the crystal ball only gives off a dull purple color, which makes the goddess conclude that he's insignificant. She ignores him and calls up the next person to detect their magic ability, and Touka walks away dejectedly because he's still treated like a background character, even in a different world. He decides to accept that as his reality because he won't be getting any special treatment. Yasu steps up to measure his magic, and the goddess is impressed because he's giving off the same aura as the Dark Hero, who is one of the strongest heroes in the past. The goddess shows the heroes how to check their stats, and Touka decides to look at his stats. He's disappointed in how average his stats are, but he notices that he has the inherent skill of abnormal state endowment. The goddess explains that the inherent skill is unique to each individual, but Oyamata is fed up with her yapping and he tells her to quit explaining. His teacher tries to put him in order, but Oyamata tells the teacher he has no right to talk to an A rank like that because he's just a D rank hero. The goddess informs them that they're about to perform an important ritual, and she calls Touka up, but he's not enthusiastic about it. The guards force him forward as the goddess explains that the lowest ranks in the past have a way of hindering the higher-ranking heroes. This heroes decided that such heroes should be disposed of, and since Touka was the lowest in that group, that was his fate. The goddess doesn't want to dispose of Touka in front of his classmates, so she decides to give him a chance to redeem himself. She tells him that he'll be sent to some ruins using the magic circle, and that if he manages to back up he will be given the free will to live peacefully in Alien. Touka wondered if he was being sent to a dangerous place, and the goddess tells him the place is very dangerous because criminals and corrupted heroes have been sent to the ruins in the past. He decides to tell her about his inherent skill, which is the abnormal state endowment skill, hoping it will help him out of his predicament. She informs him that all abnormal state skills and spells have no value in Alien because their effects and duration are too weak and short. She informs him that his unique skill is a disappointment because he can't even use it to take down low-level demons. Touka is dejected by this, but the goddess piles on the insults, telling him it would be a waste of time to level up because his stats are too low to ever become significantly high. Touka couldn't understand why he was being subjected to such a horrible fate when everything was done against his will, and he tried to protest against the goddess, but Takuto cut him off. Takuto tells him to accept his fate and get going so he doesn't keep everyone else waiting. Yasu goes over to Touka and extends out a helping hand. Touka remembers all they've been through in the past, and he's glad that Yasu is on his side, but Yasu tells him to address him with more respect because he's a higher-ranked hero. He walks away as the goddess announces the commencement of the ritual. The circle begins to glow and the goddess throws down a leather pocket, telling Touka that the pocket is his unique item. She tells him the orb on the pocket blows when infused with mana, which is all the pocket does. Ayaka suddenly protests the goddess's decision to send Touka to the ruins because he's their classmate. The goddess knocks her out while she tells everyone else to witness the fate of the only loser in their group. Touka is pissed by this and he decides to attack the goddess with a paralyzed spell, but it's dispelled by her magic bubble, which protects her against abnormal state spells. Touka's classmates make fun of him for being so powerless and he's so pissed off that they have such low impression of him. The Takao sisters walk away because they can't stand the humiliation that Touka is being put through. Touka had enough of the goddess and his classmates looking down on him. He channels that frustration and tells the goddess to be ready for his revenge if he ever makes it back alive. As the ritual is completed and he disappears, he tries to check his stats but the window refuses to come up because of lack of visibility. He locates his pocket in the darkness and he pours mana into it, making it. He begins to make his way across the ruins when he stumbles upon some skeletal remains. Touka is now scared of the monsters that could be residing in the ruins. He suddenly dodges as a minotaur monster attacks him from behind. Touka decides to run away from the monster as fast as possible, trusting his instincts to lead him through because he can feel the murderous intent of the monsters. Touka suddenly trips on a stone and falls to the ground, surrendering to his fate as a meal for the monster. He then remembers how his classmates look down on him, and he realizes that he wants power so he can teach them all a lesson. He uses his paralyzed skill on the monster but he's surprised it worked. He decides to keep running, wondering why his spell worked, when the goddess said it would be useless against low-level demons. Touka sums up his encounter as a miracle but he comes up on a bird demon and he could feel its intent to take him down. He uses his paralyzed skill again and he's surprised that it worked. He reasons that his abnormal state skills are different from the other state skills known in Alien. He realizes that he doesn't have much mana left so he uses his poison skill on the demon bird. He's worried about what will happen if he keeps using his skills and drains his mana completely. He decides to rest for a minute but the Minotaur appears again because his paralyzed skill has worn off. Touka wonders if someone will come to his rescue but he remembers that no one ever comes to his aid. He decides to keep laying waste to the monsters so that he can stay alive for as long as possible. He's ready to begin the struggle for survival in the ruins as he makes up his mind to live. The story continues. We see Touka attempts to use Paralyze on the Minotaur again but this time the skill fails to activate, so Touka has to jump out of the way. He's informed by the system that he is not allowed to cast the same effect multiple times on a single target, so it becomes up with a new plan and casts Sleep on the Minotaur, causing it to fall to the ground unconscious. And once the monster is out cold, Touka applies poison to it as well. It looks like there are no restrictions on stacking effects, but he's out of mana so if he keeps using his skills, he will eventually burn through his stamina as well, and are still a lot more monsters for him to deal with. Touka begins spamming paralysis and eventually he has managed to stop all the monsters, but has left him on the verge of collapse. However, his troubles aren't over yet, as even more monsters begin to approach, so he has no choice but to keep using Paralyzed until his body can't take it anymore, and it's not long before he reaches his limit and can't go on. There are still a lot of monsters around him, but he knows if he tries to use his still even one more time it could mean the end of him. He has no other options available but luckily, just he's about to use up the last of his body stamina, the cockatrice that he pours in a while ago suddenly eyes and due to this memory's level shoots up until he's at level 258 and both his mana and stamina are replenished. Touka doesn't understand what happened at first, but then he notices the dead monster and realizes that he must have gotten experience because his poison killed that one, and with his energy replenished he can keep fighting as much as necessary. As he continues to spam paralysis his skill levels up, leading him to believe he can upgrade it by repeated use, but he will worry about that later since for now, he has to make sure he can escape this place alive. With his paralysis now being level 2 Touka notices that he now has the option to select multiple targets at once, so he does so and the monsters are all immediately frozen in place. So far, the status effects of have 100% success rate so Vicious is probably the only person in this world that his skill has no effect on. He begins inflicting poison on all the paralyzed monsters and eventually his poison skill levels up as well, but there are still a lot more monsters here, so that means he can level up even more. Touka takes a look at his status window and since he leveled up, his stats are far higher than they were when he first got here, especially his mana which is now over 8,000 and mana is his only way of surviving this hellhole. Touka takes a break and sits down while he waits for the poison to do its thing, and eventually the monsters begin dying one by one, raising memory's level even further. By the time he's level 500, Touka is fairly confident that he can now make it out of the ruins, so be prepared to take care of the remaining monsters. However, after seeing Touka kill dozens of them with ease, the monsters have enough common sense to know that they shouldn't mess with him, so they all run off. Now that the area is safe, Touka sifts through the piles of rotting bones in order to find any loot that he could use, and after getting his hands on a cloak and a blade, he sets off to escape the ruins. As he looks for the exit, he comes across many different monsters, but he has realized that he faces another problem. He has no food, so he's going to start soon if he doesn't get something to eat. He's so desperate that he's even willing to eat monster meat, so after retracing his steps, he returns to the monster corpses and reluctantly begins carving into them to eat what he can. However, as the eyeball pops out and Touka tries to eat it, he realizes that the monster's entire body has acid in it, so he won't be able to eat it after all. With no source of food, Touka believes he will starve to death or he ever makes it out of here. He has no energy left in his body, but then he notices the color of his magic bag changing, and since that's the only source of light he has, he frantically rushes over to supply it with more mana. However, as he does so, he feels something appear inside the bag, and to his delight he finds a bag of beef jerky and a bottle of soda. He excitedly begins eating. While this means his hunger problem is solved for now, he doesn't know for sure if he will be able to get the bag-produced food again. As days continue to pass inside the ruins, Touka has gotten used to committing mass monster genocide with his skills, but he is worried that he might be losing his humanity because of this. Back on Earth, after suffering abuse at the hands of his stepfather, Touka was on the verge of having his murderous villain arc right then and there, but before he could lose his sense of humanity, he was rescued by his aunt and uncle who took him in and gave him a sense of normalcy. He learned empathy from them and he thought he had become a normal person like them. Right now, as he is staring at the mountain of corpses beneath his feet, he feels nothing at all. There's no going back to how he was before, so Touka just accepts that he's a psychopath now and moves on. As he goes, he comes across another action of the ruins with the floating eyeball monster, but Touka just takes it out with his poison. As he moves forward, he comes across a door with a magic lock, and upon opening it he finds a small room with two skeletons inside. He assumed they must have been people that were disposed of by Vicious as well, but they weren't fortunate enough to make it out alive. He searches through the things and finds a pouch full of gems, so while he feels bad about stealing from the dead, the gems could be valuable and he could use them once he gets out of here, so he no longer feels bad about it. He goes through the other rooms nearby as well and eventually comes across one that takes a large amount of mana to open. Once he finally unlocks it, he finds a skeleton sitting with a note next to it. The note says that the skeleton was once a man known as Anglin the Great Sage, and he was the former hero of darkness. The same one Vicious had mentioned was the strongest of them all. According to Anglin's note, Vicious sent him here by force after she no longer has a need for him as a hero, and while he was powerful enough to make it this far, he clearly couldn't escape, so he left a message to help the next person who could manage to make it this far. Vicious may have said the Demon Lord was evil, but she's just as bad in Touka's eye, although we can't say he is much better than her either, since his only goal is to get revenge on her and he doesn't care if he has to destroy the world to do it. As he's looting Anglin's corpse, he comes across a book of forbidden arts, and it is full of information about recipes for medicine and magic tool instructions that could prove to be useful later, so he decides to keep it. He also finds a scroll of forbidden magic, but he doesn't understand what it says. However, if a great sage like Anglin went through all the trouble of keeping it hidden with him up until his final moments, then it must be really powerful, and it may even be strong enough for Touka to eventually defeat the goddess if he's ever able to decipher it. Touka is just about ready to leave, but before he goes, he steals Anglin's cloak because it's cooler than his old one, and takes a look at Anglin's book again, but this time he sees a bloody warning telling him to beware of the Soul Eater, and the ominous warning has me wondering if the Soul Eater is the one who killed Anglin. Touka continues making his way through the ruins until he comes across a door that he thinks will lead to the surface. However, this is truly the final door, then that must mean the Soul Eater Anglin was talking about this here as well. Touka remains cautious of his surroundings and takes a look at his stats to make sure he is prepared for this. He did all he could to ensure he leveled up as much as possible before he got here, so we can only hope that his skills are enough to defeat it. Touka eventually finds a creepy face and he is certain that this must be the Soul Eater, so he immediately attempted to use Paralyze on it, but the second he steps out of cover, the Soul Eater fires a laser into his hand. This is the first time anything has managed to stop him from using his skill, and Touka has to kill it, since the only way out is to use the gem on his forehead. To activate his skill, he needs to say it out loud and be within a certain distance, but none of that matters if the Soul Eater can attack him before he finishes casting the spell. While Touka is still thinking about what to do, the Soul Eater breaks out of the wall to go after him, so he really has no choice but to fight now. Meanwhile, outside the ruins, a girl is trying to escape from her pursuers and decides to hide nearby, not knowing their fierce battle is taking place inside. As the Soul Eater slowly approaches Touka, he wonders why it hasn't fired its lasers at him yet, but he soon finds out why as the Soul Eater spits up some purple gum which takes the form of humans. These are the souls of the people the Soul Eater has killed, and they are being forced to attack Touka, so if he's forced to paralyze them. However, he can't bring himself to use poison because they are still human, even if they become gross globs of paste. The Soul Eater enjoys watching as Touka struggles because he can't attack the souls for moral reasons, and he can't attack the Soul Eater either because it would react too fast. Touka begins breaking down and crying a lot because he says he doesn't want to hurt other people, and he's losing aura by the minute with his constant crying, but as the Soul Eater is reveling in Touka's tears, he reveals that it was all an act as he paralyzes the Soul Eater. He knew he could never land a successful paralyze on the Soul Eater unless he managed to get it to lower its guard, so if he pretended to be in the middle of a mental crisis just so the Soul Eater wouldn't suspect anything, and now that the Soul Eater is paralyzed, Touka doesn't really care what happens to the souls if he kills the Soul Eater, and even though he spent so much time trying to become a harmless law-abiding citizen, all he cares about are facts. Those soul puppets were trying to kill him so they could be babies. All he cares, he's still going to poison them anyway. The Soul Eater struggles to move out of frustration that it lost to Touka, and this lets Touka know that powerful monsters can try to overcome his paralysis, but it does additional damage to their bodies. That's interesting at all, but he doesn't want to waste any more time here. So he casts poison on the Soul Eater and destroys it once and for all. Upon doing so, the souls that the Soul Eater consumed are released, and they all appear in front of Touka to thank him for freeing them. They've been rooting for him as he tried to survive the ruins, and none of them really mind the fact that he looted their bodies either. Touka is then approached by Anglin, and he has only one thing to say. He wants Touka to take down the goddess and avenge them all. The souls of the dead pass on after that, and while Touka normally wouldn't accept a request without some sort of compensation, he was already planning on taking her down anyway, and now that the final monster has been defeated, Touka can open the door and begin his quest for revenge on the surface. Meanwhile, Touka's classmates are all busy hunting to level up, and while Oyamata is busy chasing down a wolf, Takuto easily annihilates the monster with his Dragonic Burst, putting him at level 18, and Yasu is just having a blast with his powers over here. Meanwhile, on the other side of the forest, this girl is having a hard time coming to terms with the situation, but all of a sudden she's approached by Asagi, who warns Kabato that she can't be spacing out like that, otherwise she'll end up getting herself killed. The reason she came over is because she wanted to discuss something with her, so she begins talking about how sooner or later the class is going to split defections. There are a lot of powerful douchebag in the class, including her, so there's no way they'll keep getting along much longer. That's why when the class eventually divides, she was Kabato to join her faction. Besides, it's not like that Kabato has many other options considering she's deranked. There's no way she'll be accepted into Takuto's S-ranked group while being deranked. The Takao sisters only ever team up with each other, and Ayaka probably going to end up dead before long. Kabato was shocked to hear that, but Asagi continues by saying Kabato needs to think long and hard about her future since she may end up with nowhere to go, and while Asagi probably won't need her help much since she's beranked, she happens to be an OP enthusiast, and she's particularly fond of Kabato for that reason. Now that Kabato was on board with joining the group, Asagi calls for the other girls to bring over the monster they captured. She knows Kabato hasn't been able to complete the assignment that Goddess gave them, so she prepared things to make it easier for her. Now all she needs to do is kill the defenseless monster, and Asagi urges her to do it unless she wants to end up getting disposed of like Touka. Kabato doesn't want to do it, but she knows she has no choice, so she sucks at her morals and slays the monster. Asagi praises Kabato for doing a good job and says she's officially part of the group, but Kabato is still struggling to accept what she just did. Elsewhere, Ayaka was woken up from her coma, and the pain in her stomach reminds her of what must have happened to Touka after the goddess got punched her, and she feels really guilty for not being able to stop it, so she goes on to complain to Vicious, and Vicious is really trying to play the part of the caring goddess with all the fake tears. But she says the disposal of the weak is the policy of the alien kingdom, so there's nothing she can do about it. Vicious also informs Ayaka that she doesn't have much time to wallow in sadness over it either, since while she was knocked out, her classmates headed out to the forest to see if they were able to kill monsters or not, and many of them ended up failing the requirements of the test, thus were disposed of. Ayaka asks Vicious intends to kill off any heroes who she deems to be weak, but Vicious claims is aliens' policy, so it's not her fault, even though she's a literal goddess. So Vicious say how things are going, so she wants to make it clear to Vicious that she doesn't approve how things are being handled. Vicious doesn't see what the problem is, since it's common sense that all the worthless people should be disposed of, so Ayaka asks Vicious if she is a valuable hero since she is S-class. Vicious answers that Ayaka is indeed very valuable, so Ayaka proposes a deal. She will go above and beyond as an S-rank hero to make up for the weaknesses of the people who failed, so she asks that Vicious stop the disposal plan. Vicious says she can agree to those terms, so she extends her hand to make it official. She also wants to apologize for punching Ayaka in the stomach, but she still thinks she was justified in doing so since Ayaka was acting hysterical over the situation. Ayaka clearly isn't fooled by Vicious and nice act, but she's got no other choice at the moment, so she agrees to shake her hand, but as she leaves, she notes that Vicious' hands were ice cold just like her heart probably. Meanwhile, in the dark forest, a girl's trying to escape her pursuers and she had thought she lost them. They are way too good at tracking, based on nothing more than a broken leaf. Meget's Bladens is able to tell exactly where the Princess Knight ran off to. She may be able to conceal herself, but if she keeps making working mistakes like these, the Holy Watchers be sure to catch up to her sooner or later. At the same time, Touka is just about to head out into the forest in hopes of finding a city, but before he does, he checks his stats one last time and notes that only his mana is exceptionally high at 50,000, while the rest of his stats hover around 5k. But he already knew that, so he really wants to confirm as the new abilities he got with his skills leveling up, he is now able to dispel paralyze and poison and will or partially dispel it just to avoid killing his target immediately. That's going to be pretty useful when it comes to extracting information, so he decides to test it out on the next monster he encounters. For now, he's going to need a blade, or more specifically, someone who could act as a tank and handle the front lines for him. Just then, he hears some rustling in the bushes, so he goes over to check it out and finds a bunch of slimes ending up on a single smaller slime, and he decides to stand there and watch as the smaller slime goes through his bullying character arc. Once the small slime learns to fight back, Touka is satisfied, so he paralyzes them all and uses the opportunity to test out the dispel option. He dispels the paralysis on the bully slimes first to get them to leave, and once they are gone, he tells the smaller slime that it doesn't need to worry since he has no intention of killing it. He's about to let it go as well, but before that he wants to apologize for not helping sooner. Enjoyed seeing the little guy stand up for himself, so he tells the slime that it did well, and after releasing it he heads off on his way. The slime doesn't really know what to do now since it doesn't have any slime friends to go back to, so decides to follow Touka instead. Touka eventually notices that he's being followed, but he doesn't mind since he could use the company. Meanwhile, the Princess Knight is currently exhausted from all the running she's had to do, but here with the distance she has covered, she can still sense the presence of the Holy Watchers nearby, so they must just be waiting for the tire out so they can capture her. Touka and the slime that bonded a little, so slime is now sitting in the back of Touka's jacket to keep watch while he takes a look at the spell book. After flipping through some pages, Touka finds the full-bitten art he was looking for, and it's one that's meant to strengthen monsters. There are even instructions on how to strengthen slimes in particular, so this will come in handy for Touka, but he understands why it's classified as a forbidden art since these could cause a lot of chaos in the wrong hands. Before he does anything else, Touka talks to the slime and tells it that he is on a quest for revenge, so if the slime isn't okay with that, this is his last chance to back out. The slime sign says he wants to stick by Touka's side, so Touka names at Pigamaru and prepares to continue with his journey. The fleeing Princess Knight can sense that the Holy Watchers are closing in on her, so while she hoped she wouldn't have to use it, she's forced to activate her spirit contract. She offers up her sleepless payment and even does the old Power Rangers transformation routine, but as the Holy Watchers finally catch up, they are shocked to find out that they've been tracking the wrong person since Touka definitely isn't their target. Now they could have just ignored Touka since he has nothing to do with their mission, but they're too scummy to do something like that, so one tells Touka to drop all his valuables so they don't have to kill him, but the other guy says he's still going to kill Touka anyway because it'll be fun. They also talked about doing terrible things to his corpse, so Touka has already decided that these guys have got to go and watch them real quick, while the scumbags aren't paying attention. Touka starts shuffling away slowly, and while the group notices and think he was trying to escape, Touka was actually just trying to get them all within his field of vision. Touka plays the part of his scared weakling well, but as Megetz attempts to slice him up, he wastes no time in paralyzing him along with all his teammates. Since it was successful, Touka now knows that his status effects work on humans as well, so Vicious is probably the only person who's immune to them. Back to the Holy Watchers, these guys weren't as intimidating as the monsters he had to fight in the ruins, but their malicious intent was far worse, so Touka has no issue with killing them since they tried to kill him first. He casts his poison, and after all the Holy Watchers are dead, Touka spends some time looting their corpses, but then both he and Pigamaru sense some nearby. Meanwhile, the Princess Knight has been standing in battle position for a while now, and she just noticed that she can no longer feel the presence of the Holy Watchers in the forest, but she thinks it must be some kind of trap to get her to lower her guard. However, just then she senses someone else in the forest and it's freaking her out. This guy's presence isn't immensely powerful, but for some reason, the spirits are scared of him. Just then she hears something behind her, so she attacks. However, it turns out to be Pigamaru, who was acting as a distraction from Touka, and with the girl's back turned, Touka paralyzes her. She sensed her intent to attack, but it wasn't out of malice, so Touka grew curious and thought they could chat for a bit. Although he doesn't let her move as a precaution, she asks him what he wants from her, so Touka explains that he's not from around here and needs help learning about the area, so he was hoping she could make herself useful. Before that, she asked about the other 4 guys that were in the forest, so Touka tells her that he killed them. The girl was shocked, so Touka asks if it's a problem that he killed them, but she says she is just surprised that Touka was able to defeat the Holy Watchers on his own. She can sense that Touka isn't lying to her, probably thinning stone of her abilities, so she agrees to answer any questions Touka and may have for her in return for saving her life from the Holy Watchers. Touka can tell that this girl isn't a bad person, so he trusts her a little more now, but there are still some things that he would rather keep to himself though, and the same goes for the girl, so they both agree not to pry into each other's personal matters. As the timer for paralysis counts down, Touka asks a lot of questions and learns that this place isn't even alien. He's currently in a place called the Kingdom of Ulza, so the goddess disposed of him and someone else's kingdom. Touka still has one last question for the girl, so he pulls out a page from the Forbidden Arts book and asks the girl if she understands it. The girl is able to recognize that it is some sort of ancient script, but that was as much as she could say since she wasn't able to read it either. However, she says she may know someone who can understand that writing, so she tells Mimori about the Witch of Taboos. She possesses such vast knowledge of forbidden techniques that she was deemed too dangerous and was driven from her homeland. Touka asks where he should go if she wants to find her, so the girl instructs him to go to the land of the golden-eyed monsters, but it's a treacherous part of the continent. Touka thanks her for the valuable information, but the girl doesn't feel like she has done enough to repay her debts since Touka saved her life. Touka says she doesn't have to worry about doing any more than this, so they'll be parting ways now. The girl is fine with it as long as Touka is satisfied, and Touka and can tell that she has a strong sense of honor and honesty, which reminds him a lot of his aunt, who was so nice that it often made him worry about her. He tells her that the paralysis will be undone in a few minutes, but he can't guarantee her safety since he will be leaving now. As Touka leaves, he says he hopes the girl makes it to her destination safely, and as Pigamaru returns, he asks if Touka isn't going to kill her. Touka says he wouldn't do that since he doesn't find any joy in killing, he just does it for self-defense, so there's no reason to pointlessly murder the girl. Although he can't guarantee that the girl will come after him to attack once she's free to move again, so he asked Pigamaru to keep watching his back for him. Touka soon makes it to the town, and he is stopped at the front gate by a guard who is in charge of performing security checks. She assumes Touka must be a traveling mercenary who came here to conquer the mill's ruins. Touka plays along with the story and says he indeed came here to conquer the ruins, also adding that he comes from Ulza town, so he doesn't know much about this place. His story seems convincing enough for the guard, so she lets him in since she has orders to allow as many mercenaries as possible into the towns. Touka is surprised by the relaxed security since there were no luggage checks or full cavity body searches, but it works out well for him since his plans are going smoothly. The first thing he does is head to an inn to get himself a room, but while he's at the front desk, innkeeper is being pretty rude to him since he thinks Touka is a broke loser. However, little does he know Touka eluded a bunch of money off the corpses of the Holy Watchers, and as soon as he flashes a bit of cash, the innkeeper starts treating him a whole lot nicer. Touka gets to stay in a room like he wanted, and now that his accommodations have been secured, he goes out into town for a bit to survey the area, and even though he's an outsider, he doesn't feel any hostility directed towards him. So he takes a leisurely stroll and comes across places like item shops and the town's adventurers guild. This information may come in handy later, but for now, Touka has gotten hungry, so he turns around and heads to a nearby tavern to grab some food. He tries the food of this world for the first time and it doesn't taste great, but it's edible enough that Touka is okay eating it. He thinks this tavern is great because the people here are happy and drunk, and thus makes it easy to gather information since everyone is talking so loudly. He's able to overhear some guys talking about how the continent is full of insanely strong people, so they having a power scaling debate about who they think is the strongest. But in the end they know that there's only one team that can hold the title of strongest, and that's the Black Dragon Knights who destroyed the Kingdom of Ni. Their 5 dragons alone are enough to completely wipe out an army, but on top of that, they got humanity's strongest and the hero's slayer, so it's a safe bet to say they would win any direct confrontation. After Touka has gathered a good amount of intel for the night, he takes some leftover rice back to his room so he can feed Pigamaru, and while Pigamaru is eating, he goes over his plans for the future. For now, his top priority is finding someone who knows how to read the language in the scroll of forbidden magic, and the only person who would be able to do that is the Witch of Taboos. Another priority of his is to make the monster strengthening solution so he can improve the abilities of Pigamaru. But now that he's thinking about it, the nobleman of this town has been gathering mercenaries to conquer the mill's ruins, and one of the ingredients needed for the strengthening solution are the bones of the skeleton soldier, and skeleton soldiers just so happen to be found in the mill's dungeon, so Touka makes plans to head there tomorrow. The next day, all the mercenaries in town gather towards the Marquis Cred Hercule has to say. Cred tells them that a new floor within the ruins has been uncovered, so he is tasting them all with exploring set floor, and as a reward he promises that whosoever manages to acquire the Dragon Eye Chalice that is within the ruins will receive a prize of 300 gold pieces. Is also willing to pay good price for any other treasures that are brought back, and the mercenaries are free to use whatever monster parts they find as they see fit. Touka is glad because that means he will be allowed to keep the skeleton bones from the ruins once he acquires them. Now that everyone is clear on the terms, they all line up to begin registration, but while Touka is waiting in line, he never sees a commotion going on at the other end of the line. There's this random guy constantly yapping about how one girl in line is really pretty. In fact, she's so pretty that he could swear if she was a princess, or maybe even a princess knight of the destroyed kingdom of Ni, and who wasn't bounty on her head perhaps. We see what happened was that a couple years back this guy tried asking the princess knight out on date, but she said no, and from that day onwards, he had burned her face, voice, and chest into his Touka so he could get his revenge someday, and she went to great lengths to ensure her face was covered, so the man has to have some degenerate skill if he was able to recognize her just from her opie. Anyway, to prove that he is right about her identity, he reaches over to pull off her cloak and show the crowd her face, but as he does so, he is shocked to find out that the girl's face isn't the same as that of Princess Sarah's Ashrain, and the girl now states that her name is Miss Belucas. He never misidentifies Opie, so he knows that she must be Ashrain, but he has no way of proving it, so he swears to get his revenge on Mist as well as every beautiful woman that has made him look like a fool. A little while later, Touka is planning on going shopping for some supplies to use during the mission, but as he is walking, the girl approaches him to ask if he's here to explore the dungeon as well. Touka recognizes her and feels sympathetic that she has to deal with so many people trying to reveal her identity, but she says it's not that much of a problem since she disguised her face ahead of time. Still, Touka suggests she be careful about guys like that, because even if he doesn't know her real identity for now, he seems like he's petty enough to try attacking her, just because she made him look like a fool in front of everyone. But that said, Touka tells her that he has a request he would like to make, so he explains that he has no idea about the value of the items in this town, so he would like her to help him negotiate so that he doesn't get swindled. And of course, he isn't asking her to do this for free, as he promises to compensate her for her assistance if she accepts. She decides to accept his offer since she's pretty much broke right now, so that two shake hands and she introduces herself to him as her alias, Mist, while Touka introduces himself under the name Hattie. The two of them proceed to go shopping together, and since Mist went and negotiated for him, she ultimately saves Touka's around 3 silver coins worth and deals, so he gives that to her as her compensation. She's surprised to receive this much money just for shopping with him, but Touka believes is a fair reward for the help she offered him, so she accepts the payment and is about to leave, but as she attempts to walk away, she ends up collapsing to the ground. Touka asked her if she is alright and she says she's okay, but she hasn't been able to sleep well for the past few days so she's a little tired. She then turns and leaves, so Touka leaves things as they are and decides to head to the ruins to begin hunting for skeletons. Within the ruins, as Touka descending the stairs, he hears some mercenaries scream as they run past him that there's a little ox demon down there, so Touka assumes it must be a miniature version of the minotaurs that he had to fight in the ruins of Disposal. The ox demon charges towards him, but Touka quickly paralyzes and poisons it, so it wasn't much of a threat to him, and he stabs the ox demon to test whether the demon's skin is as tough as the ones in the abandoned ruins, but this one is much easier to stab. A little while later, those mercenaries that ran away earlier return with backup to defeat the ox demon, and when they find it dead, they are shocked that someone was actually capable of killing a monster like this so quickly. Touka heads deeper into the ruins, but despite the place crawling with monsters, he isn't feeling very threatened by any of them since they are easy to kill. He isn't getting much experience from killing the monsters either, so he decides to head a little deeper into the ruins to find some strong monster. While walking through the halls, he happens to overhear that loser from earlier talking to a couple of mercenaries, and he's asking them to go after Mist and make her regret ever being born, all because she didn't want to go on a date with him and made him look like he was wrong about her identity. So he can't let her continue to live in this world, and preferably, he wants the mercenaries make her suffer as much as possible before killing her so he can see the twisted look of despair on her. At first, the mercenaries thought it was messed up to go this far just because someone ignored him, but money is money, so they agreed to do it and start talking about how they will torture her. Touka overhears all of this, and since he is sure these guys are irredeemable scumbags at this point, and he's not about to let them get away with their plans to kill Mist, so he steps out to confront them. As soon as they see him, they all threaten to kill Touka, but Touka just raises his hand and paralyzes them all. He then inflicts poison on them, and it feels oddly satisfying to eliminate scumbags when he gets the chance. After the scumbags are dead, Touka continues his venture into the ruins, but before he heads to the next level, he decides to take a little break. 3 hours later, Touka wakes up from his nap and thanks Pigamaru for being a lookout in case any monster showed up. He exits the room to head to the next floor, but before he can do that, he runs into a team of mercenaries and they tell them to be careful since there's a lot of strange stuff happening in these ruins. People have been coming across a lot of monster corpses, but it's not clear what killed the monsters since there are no clear signs of attack. It pretty much looks like the monsters fell over dead in the middle of the ruins. As the leader of the Saber Tigers party, Lily Adamantine values the lives of her teammates more than anything else, so while she would normally continue with the ruins exploration, she has made the decision to back out and head back to the surface. She even offers to let Touka come with her, but Touka says she wants to continue with the ruins exploration, so Lily and the rest of her team wishes him good luck with that. Touka knows all the unexplained deaths are because of him, but it works out well in his favor since if people believe there's something strange going on in the ruins, that means fewer mercenaries will show up in the ruins. Touka heads down deeper until he finally arrives at the room where the Dragonite Chalice is located, and there's a giant gargoyle statue right beside it, but it's totally harmless, so there's no need to worry about it. Yet, Touka isn't stupid, so he casts Paralyzed and Poison on the statue, and sure enough, it turns out to be a monster and it soon ends up dying. Touka has now officially obtained the Dragon Chalice, and soon after he acquires it, Mist shows up and is disappointed that she didn't manage to get here first. Touka doesn't really care about the chalice, so he says Mist can have it if she wants. She can't believe Touka would give her something worth 300 gold coins, so she asks what she wants in return, but Touka honestly doesn't need anything from her. Mist said she can't accept something so valuable for free, but Touka says she should just hurry up and take it, and she should probably get some proper sleep soon, otherwise she will end up collapsing. She still doesn't feel right accepting this, so Touka tells her that he never cared about the cup in the first place. What he's really after is located further down in the ruins, so Mist offers to act as his guard while he's down there. Right now, the only thing she can think to offer him is her skill with her sword, and she promises not to be hindrance, so Touka agrees under few conditions. The first condition is that neither of them asks too many questions about each other's personal lives, and he won't necessarily be returning to the surface within a day, so if Mist wants to return by herself, Touka won't be responsible for her safety. Mist agrees to the terms, so they head down to the next floor, and Mist shows Touka just how useful she can be as she cuts down a giant flower monsters. Touka is impressed, but there's something he would like to ask her about. He has noticed that some monsters have golden eyes while others don't, so he was wondering what the difference is between them. Mist explains that monsters with golden eyes are said to contain experience, so they are the perfect prey for monsters, the heroes of another world, to level up. She has no idea that Touka is one of said heroes, so she was on to explain that heroes gain no experience from killing humans, so experience for them is something that is unique to monsters, and in regards to monsters without golden eyes, they are just regular monsters and can even form friendly relationships with humans under the right circumstances. According to legends, the Demon King radiates a powerful energy known as Demon Essence, and monsters which are affected by this essence become incredibly violent and how their eyes turn gold. Before they go any further, Touka suggests they take a break so Mist can get some sleep, but she says she doesn't need any sleep since she's meant to be guarding Touka, but he eventually convinces her to lie down, and once she does, he casts sleep on her so she can get some proper rest. Meanwhile, the Black Dragon Knights have just come across the site where the Holy Watchers were killed, and their leader, Civic Gartland, is excited to face the person who's strong enough to take out the Holy Watchers so easily. After a few hours, Touka's sleep effect wears off, so Mist's disguise returns as she wakes up, as she has no idea how she fell asleep since her pack should still be in effect. She looks around for Touka, and to her relief, it looks like he was sleeping the entire time, so he couldn't have seen her true identity. However, Touka is just pretending to sleep so she doesn't become paranoid, and once he pretends to wake up they continue their journey further into the dungeon. They soon arrive at another room, and while it looks like it's empty, Touka hears an unsettling sound, so he warns Mist back away from the door, and moments later, a Skeleton King emerges. Touka can tell if the Skeleton King is much stronger than any other monster they faced till now, but Mist believes they should be able to slay if they target the silver part on its chin. That's a pretty obvious weak spot, but the Skeleton King is still a formidable monster. It is so strong that it would take all the members of the Saber Tiger party to defeat it. The Skeleton King seems to think Mist is the biggest threat here, so she's likely going to get targeted first. She needs to get ready to defend herself, so she tells Touka that she's about to use her trump card, but she would like it to remain a secret for as long as possible, so she asked him to keep it between them. Mist also apologizes in advance because if the monster exceeds her expectations, and she may not be able to defend Touka as she promised earlier. Touka agrees that the Skeleton King is strong and fighting it would probably be rather troublesome, so he decides to use his ability and paralyze the monster. Mist is shocked on the monster freezes in place, and even more so when Touka poisons it and defeats the monster in world record time. Now that it has been defeated, Touka begins collecting the bones from the Skeleton King and confirms that these are the ones the recipe requires. He says they can head back to the surface now, but he can tell that Mist has dozens of questions to ask him, so he says he will give her some answers as long as the questions are too invasive. Just then, Pigamaru gets Touka's attention and tells him that there's something interesting over by the skeleton, so Touka goes to take a look and he indeed finds something interesting. It's a magic cloth with an egg wrapped inside it, and while he has no idea what to do with it, he decides to take it with him regardless. Meanwhile, Touka's classmates are all running away in fear after encountering a group of skeleton soldiers, and this girl in particular is freaking out on the floor over her dismembered hand, but there are still skeletons approaching to dismember more than her hand, so Ayaka is trying to step up and defend her weaker classmates, but Oyamata doesn't give a shit about his classmates and runs and blasting the skeletons. Same as Takuto, although he nearly kills his classmates as well, but why would he care about them? He just hit level 24, so he is too busy patting himself on the back for a job well done. Meanwhile, Touka and Mist have made it back to the surface, and Mist presents the dragon chalice so she can receive her reward, and while the crowd surrounds her to get a look at the chalice, Touka quietly walks away since he's gotten everything he needs from the mill's ruins. After a while, Mist catches up to Touka and tells him that an award ceremony is going to be held tomorrow where she will be awarded her prize money, so she's still going to need to stay in town till then. Since she's not busy for the rest of the day, Touka asks if he can have a chat with her in private. He asks if they can meet up in his room later tonight, and Mist is fine with that, so Touka turns to leave, but before he goes she grabs Touka by the arm and thanks him once again for giving her the dragon chalice. Later that night, Pigamaru is eating his dinner while Touka prepares the monster strengthening solution, and just as he finishes making it, Mist arrives at his door. Touka lets her inside, and he gets right to the point as he tells Mist that he wants to hire her as his bodyguard. Mist is rather surprised by the proposal, but Touka thought it would be a win-win since she would get extra travel funds, but then again, if she receives the 300 gold coins then she probably won't need to worry about money for a while. In any case, he pulls out a map and tells Mist that his goal is to reach the Witch of Taboos and the land of the golden-eyed monsters. He is expecting to get swarmed by a large number of monsters on his journey at least once, so he would feel a lot better if he had a capable warrior there to watch his back for him. And after working with her in the mill's ruin, he believes Mist would be the perfect bodyguard for him. Mist happens to be on her way to Yamato, which means she could accompany Touka quite conveniently, but she is still hesitant to accept the offer for some reason. Touka notices this and tells her that there's no rush to answer right away. Besides, he had something he wanted to discuss with Sarah's first anyway. It takes her a moment to realize that Touka just called her by her real name. And once she does, she asks me more how he knew about her real identity. Touka reveals that he was the one who put her to sleep back in the dungeon, and as such, he saw her real face. It's clear that she was hesitating to accept his offer because she was worried about how difficult it would be to keep her identity secret from him while traveling together, which is probably the reason she refused to sleep while working with Touka earlier. He assures her that he has no intention of selling her out for any reason, so she doesn't have to worry about him betraying her. Ceres reveals that she uses the power of spirits to conceal her identity, but in exchange, she has to forego her desire to sleep. That's why she returns to normal when she goes to sleep, and it's also the reason why the Holy Watchers were chasing her back in the forest, since they managed to spot her while she was asleep and didn't have her disguise. She begins to undo her disguise as she tells Touka that she's grateful for him killing the Holy Watchers, since she has a lot less to worry about now. Touka asks if the fact that she removed her disguise around him means that she trusts him now, and Ceres confirms that she believes he's a trustworthy person. She officially agrees to act as Touka's bodyguard, and the two shake hands to mark their new partnership. Touka reaches into his bag and pulls out a blue gem to give to Ceres as her payment, but Ceres is stunned as he hands it to her because this thing is an authentic blue dragon gem. Touka doesn't know what the big deal is since it's just one of the gems he looted in the abandoned ruins, so Ceres explains that gems like this are incredibly rare and are even worth way more than the dragon chalice. Touka doesn't really care that the gem is valuable, so he tells Ceres she could still keep the gem anyway. Ceres doesn't want to accept it because it is worth way too much, but Touka has a whole bag full of them, so he insists that she keep the gem. Ceres finally relents and agrees to accept the gem as payment, but before they go their separate ways for today, Touka says they should still call each other by their aliases to protect their identities when they are out in public. Ceres agrees to this, and since they will be working together for a while, she thinks she should inform Touka of the reason why she's on the run. However, Touka tells her he doesn't need to know that he has no interest in prying into her past unnecessarily, nor does he want her to feel pressured into telling him anything. The next day, Touka and Ceres are having breakfast together, and Touka takes the opportunity to ask her if she happens to know anything about forbidden magic. Ceres tells him that it is magic that has been prohibited by Vicious, but they are generally understood to be specific ancient spells. The only reason the spells are forbidden is because Vicious said so, and the people don't like questioning her. If Vicious went through the trouble to personally outlaw the forbidden spells, then it is very likely that she did so because the spells could be dangerous to her. Unfortunately, Ceres doesn't have any more information on the forbidden spells, but Touka says she's giving him a good amount of info, so he's thankful. After breakfast, Ceres says she needs to go to the awards ceremony so she can get her prize, so she will meet back up with me more in the afternoon, and after going their separate ways, Touka decides to head into the forest and test out that monster strengthening potion he made. Meanwhile, at the reception for Ceres, an illusionist was hired to make sure the dragon chalice was the real thing, and this wouldn't be an issue normally, but Ceres has a bad feeling about this since she's using illusion magic to hide her identity. Hours go by and Ceres still hasn't returned like she had said she would, so Touka is starting to get rather worried. Meanwhile, Vicious is having a meeting with Ayaka over the recent ruin expedition to the ruins that the class took, and Ayaka asks if Vicious can take care of Sakura since she got her hand cut off. Vicious agrees to heal the girl, but she makes it clear that she's only doing it because Sakura is B rank, otherwise if she were something like D rank, then health insurance wouldn't be available for her. By the way, Vicious asks Ayaka if she is considered join Takuto team, but Ayaka can't imagine herself getting along with Takuto when he cares so little about the lives around him. Vicious calls Ayaka's decision selfish, so Ayaka starts trying to explain herself, but Vicious tells her she's obligated to justify herself. Although she wants to know if Ayaka is still committed to saving this world since she isn't putting in as much effort as an S-rank adventurer should. Ayaka asserts that she's fulfilling her duties as an S-rank in her own way, so Vicious agrees to let her do as she pleases, but she also says that Ayaka will be tasked with taking care of those who couldn't pass the trials. Vicious ones are train them, but Ayaka against the idea, since the original deal was that she would fight on behalf of the weak ones. Vicious claims that a royal decree ordered her to dispose of all heroes who aren't capable of fighting, so Vicious wants Sober to train them so they can learn to kill monsters, and of course, if Sober refuses, Vicious will immediately dispose of her weak classmates, so Ayaka doesn't really have much of a choice here. She's forced to agree to Vicious' terms, and as she is leaving, Vicious points out that if any of her classmates become a hindrance to her, she may have to deal with them herself, but of course it's not like she wants to get rid of them or anything. Back to Touka, more time has passed and Ceres still isn't back yet, so either she ditched him or something happened to her, and considering how honest she's been thus far, the only possibility is that she got abducted. She has no reason to even want to lie to Touka in the first place because we gain nothing from doing so. As Touka is on his way to go looking for Ceres, he hears two guys talking about how Ceres' identity was revealed during the banquet, and she was forced to flee into the forest to escape, but Mills is organizing a hunting party to go after her, and this hunting party consists of the Black Dragon Knights. As the knights chased after Ceres, she attempts to transform using her spirit regalia, but her spirit of light got disoriented with her disguise was destroyed, so she won't be able to transform for now and has to fight in base form. She manages to take out a couple of the lower-ranked knights, but it was really difficult for her, so she fears what might happen if one of the higher-ranking members were to attack her now. Just then, she notices an arrow being fired at her from behind, but she can tell that it is just a distraction, so she quickly rushes to face her real opponent, the Dragon Knight's vice-captain. He is a much tougher foe than the rest of them, so she struggles to defend herself, and she unfortunately loses her footing, so the vice-captain disarms her as she falls to the ground and gets on top of her. He is about to do unspeakable things, but before he actually does anything, Touka arrives and paralyzes him. Ceres is shocked to see Touka here, but she knows she's safe now, so she climbs out from under the vice-captain and Touka gives him a non-lethal dose of poison for good measure. Ceres asks Mimori why he came looking for her, but before their conversation goes any further, Touka puts the vice-captain into sleep so he can't overhear them. Ceres warns Touka that if he stays with her then he will be pursued by the Black Dragon Knights as well, so she's willing to return the gem he gave her and nullify their contract so that she doesn't cause him any trouble. Touka tells her that won't be necessary because for one he has a lot of those gems, so the money isn't an issue for him, but more importantly, he isn't going to find another bodyguard home he can trust like Ceres, so he's going to stick with her. And right now, he needs Ceres to take off her clothes. The story continues. We see after an awkward pause Touka clarifies that he's only saying this because the people in town already saw her in the clothes she's wearing now, so she'll be easily recognized if she doesn't get changed soon. Ceres is relieved to hear that, and Touka tells her that he also has a proposal to make to her. He says she can try and negotiating with the Witch of Taboos to have her shelter Ceres's for the time being. No one has ever managed to figure out where the witch lives yet, so it should be a safe place for Ceres to hide, and Touka is heading there anyway so he and Ceres can keep their original agreement for her to be his bodyguard. Ceres is grateful that Touka is looking out for her, but she wonders why he's going so far to help her when they barely know one another. It may seem strange to her, but he explains that Ceres reminds him of someone very precious to him, so if he were to abandon her here, it would feel like he had abandoned his aunt, and he can't do that. Ceres once again thanks Touka for being so kind to her, and now that they've settled their agreement, Touka goes over to the vice-captain and partially dispels the paralysis will allow him to speak. The vice-captain immediately begins threatening Touka for daring to oppose a member of the Dragon Knight, but Touka is in phase and gives him an ultimatum. He can tell him what the Dragon Knights are planning, and if he does, Touka will show mercy to him. Otherwise, he's going to die slow and painful death. The man tries to act cool and confident, but he ultimately agrees to tell Touka and Ceres what they want to know. What before he can spill the beans, his brains get spilled all over the floor by a sword from the sky. Touka and Ceres turn around to get a look at the attacker, and to his horror, not only is the attacker out of range, but it's actually Civet. He has many names across this world, but he's most commonly referred to by the title of Humanity's Strongest. Civet and his 5 dragon riders are all here aside from the one whose brains are all over the floor though. Orvan asks Civet if it was really necessary to kill him, but Civet doesn't really care about casualties as long as the mission is complete. They're ordered to do this by Ordola, and that name seems to be familiar to Ceres, so she's frozen in shock. At the same time, Ordola is lying in his bed and agonizing over the thought what he has done. He never wanted to hurt Ceres because he loved her like a daughter, and more specifically, like a stepdaughter, because he explicitly states that seeing her always had him focused and stiff. He does not regret letting her escape, rather what he regrets is the fact that some other man could be having romantic relations with her, so we decided that the best course of action here was to kill her instead. Ceres can't believe Ordola would do something like that, but it's the truth. In fact, that's what Gizon was going to tell her, but since Civet thought he was being a hindrance he threw his sword and killed him, although if Gizon had managed to dodge it somehow then Civet would have let him live, but even if Gizon had been paralyzed by Touka there was no way he could have dodged an attack like that. The Dragon Rider asks what they should do with Ceres now, and according to the orders Ordola gave him, he wants Ceres to be killed and her dead body to be brought back to him and intact, at which point necrophilia is on the table for him. Ceres still can't believe that Ordola would order something like this, but Civet tells her that he's willing to give her the chance to earn her life back. He's obsessed with finding strong opponents, so if Ceres can be him in a duel and then he will let her go free. He's been here to test out the famous spirit regalia of hers, which is why he was so motivated to catch up to her, but right now, he's a lot more interested in Touka more than in Ceres. Touka is sweating bullets because he's at risk of being killed at any moment, and Sivit and his team are all still slightly out of range for his ability, so his options for counterattack are limited. But human of this dire situation, Touka still has a smile on his face as he takes a gamble. He asks Sivit if he can talk with him as he slowly makes his way forward, but Sivit asks him to identify himself first. Touka introduces himself under the name Hattie, but Sivit can immediately tell that it's a fake name, and if Touka has a reason to want to hide his name, then there must be some kind of story behind it. The Dragon Riders don't understand why Sivit is even listening to a random boy in the first place, but Sivit finds it interesting that Touka shows no fear despite being fronted by the strongest party on the continent. In fact, Sivit can tell that Touka looks like he is preparing to attack or something, and almost no one ever even considers attacking Sivit, so he knows Touka must be at least a bit special. Touka asks Sivit if it is true that he is currently searching for a worthy opponent to give him a battle he will be satisfied with, and Sivit confirms this to be true, but if that's the case, Touka asks why Sivit doesn't go after some more obviously strong people. For example, the goddess Vicious and the heroes. Sivit explains that he has a non-aggression pact with Vicious, so he can't fight her, but he still has hope in the heroes who had been summoned by Vicious, since he had heard the story of how heroes start out weak, but over time build up an incredible amount of strength, so he's patiently waiting for the day when one of them becomes strong enough to challenge him. It would be great if they have power necessary to kill him too, since Sivit has been bored with life recently, with how he is always the best at everything. Out of courtesy for Touka, Sivit even offers to kill Ceres painlessly and have her head delivered to the current princess of Ni. Ceres is asked why he would need to do that, so Sivit informs her that her escape led to all I am becoming hostile to this kingdom, and recently, they even invaded because the goddess demanded that Ceres be handed over to her, but Emperor Ordola refused. At this point that Touka speaks up and makes an interesting proposal to Sivit. He says that if Sivit is truly looking for an opponent that is capable of killing him, then Touka can become that opponent for him. Earlier Sivit mentioned that he has high hopes that the summoned heroes will become strong enough to defeat him, so Touka reveals that he is in fact one of these summoned heroes. Sivit is able to detect whether someone is lying or not, so he can tell that Touka is telling the truth. He asks what he's doing all the way out here if he's a hero, so Touka says that he holds a very unique position among his fellow heroes, so he was allowed to act independently by Vicious herself. Now this technically isn't a lie, since Touka is the only E rank, so he definitely is in a unique position, and Vicious did say that he will be allowed to do whatever he wants if he manages to survive the abandoned ruins, so that was basically her giving permission for him to act independently. Since everything Touka said is technically true, Sivit lie detection leads him to believe that Touka must be a truly promising hero for Vicious to give him special treatment, and that gets him excited, so he asks Touka to state his proposal. Touka says he would like to defer their fight, meaning he wants Sivit to spare him until he can grow strong enough to give him the fight he has been dreaming of. Sivit is amused, so he asks Touka how he intends to do that, and Touka informs him of his intentions to go to the land of the golden-eyed monsters to train, but he will definitely return to Vicious sooner or later, so Sivit won't have to worry about Touka going and hiding. Everything he has said so far is convinced Sivit, so Sivit agrees to spare Touka's life so he can grow strong enough to be a worthy opponent. He tells Touka that he can leave without having to worry about being attacked. However, he still intends to kill Ceres, so Touka speaks up again and tells Sivit that he needs Ceres in order to get through the land of golden-eyed monsters, so Sivit laughs and agrees to won't harm Ceres either, and he won't let any of the subordinates touch her either until his duel with Touka is over. Touka is really proud of his acting skills right now because he actually managed to talk his way out of a direct fight with Sivit, but as far as training so that he can have a rematch with Sivit goes, Touka's not stupid. Sivit back is turned, but he is still within range, so Touka immediately seizes the opportunity. He is paralyzed on Sivit and all the other dragon riders. Touka apologizes for betraying Sivit's trust, but he cannot kind enough to ignore a clear opening to attack, and Touka's goal is to ultimately get revenge on the goddess, so he doesn't have time to be worrying about Sivit and the others. Sivit is enraged that he was betrayed, and his title of humanity's strongest isn't for nothing, as he is managing to move even though he's under paralysis of the poison, but he ultimately isn't able to overcome it. As one of the Dragon Knights is about to die, he sets off a signal to call in all the Dragon Knights that were on standby in the forest, and as Sivit sees them, he warns them all that they need to stay out of Touka's effective range, so they should attack from the sky. However, Touka had already thought or planned to deal with the problem of having a low range on his ability, which is why after giving Pigamaru the monster strengthening potion, he's now able to link with him. He has a couple downsides since it takes a long time to get into this state and it burns through his MP, but once complete, he can use his slime tendrils to greatly extend the effective range of his paralyzed skill and knocks the Dragon Knights to the ground. Using his skills so much earned Touka a couple of new skills. He just a few out on some of the knights, of which he learns that Berser is a skill that causes someone to have violent urges and darkness is a skill that dulls one's senses and sends them into a world of pitch black. Before long, all the remaining Dragon Knights have been killed and the only one left alive is Civet, who is still trying to fight off the effects, but he too dies shortly thereafter. Following this, Touka thanks Ceres for staying by his side and guarded him while he was fighting the Dragon Knights, but she tells him not to mention it because it is the least she could do as his bodyguard. However, there's another threat Ceres wants to warn Touka of. She tells him about someone called the Hero Slayer, who's an aggressive man who could have potentially rivaled Civet, but as it so happens Touka already off-screened the Hero Slayer, so there aren't really any more immediate threats to them. Meanwhile, back with the other heroes, Ayaka is getting a little worried since she hasn't awakened a special skill yet, but all of a sudden, a purple-haired girl arrives and tells them all that Vicious is busy, so she will be taking over as the training instructor. Oyamata gets in her face and asks why they should listen to her in the first place, but the girl almost instantly knocks him out, so she has proven that she's strong enough to be in charge and tells everyone to get ready because they are heading back to the capital. On Touka end, he has just finished telling Ceres about his backstory, and how he wishes to get revenge on the goddess for what she did to him, and Ceres is willing to help him in any way she can. Touka has already risked his life on multiple occasions to save her, so as long as she's able to be of use to him, she will be his side. The story continues. We see at the abandoned ruins the guards in charge of making sure nothing goes wrong arrive to check on the place, and something has definitely gone wrong because the crystal for the gate has burned out. This would normally mean that someone managed to open the door from the inside and get out, so one of the guards thinks they should probably report this to Alien, but that would be too much paperwork, so the others decide it would be better to pretend nothing happened here. Besides, it's not like anyone could have actually survived the abandoned ruins and made it out alive. That would be impossible. Meanwhile, Touka have enjoying a festival in town, and he happens to pick up a cool-looking mask on sale, so the stall owner begins telling him about the Lord of Flies, whose the mask is made to resemble. The Lord of Flies is the person who once turned an island of monsters into his fortress, making himself the master of the demons that were ostracized by evil itself. The Lord of Flies and his army were eventually wiped out, but because he was so cool, he remains popular to this day even though he was evil. Touka decides to buy the mask and heads into a tent to try it on. He is not exactly an upstanding hero, so a mask resembling a demon would be much more fitting for him. He once again swears to himself that he will make Vicious pay for what she did to him, and his determination shouldn't be underestimated because he's literally got nothing better to do. Over in the Magnar Kingdom, the news of the downfall of the 5 dragons has reached the Holy Alliance, and the King of Magnar finds it quite hard to believe that the man hailed as humanity's strongest warrior was defeated overnight. The King of Ulza tells him that he personally identified the corpses of the Dragon Riders, so there is no doubt that they are all dead. The King of Magnar asks if the Goddess of Alien has any information on the matter, so Vicious informs him that the Dragon Riders were apparently chasing after Ceres where they met their demise, and while they don't know where Ceres was headed after the fight, they did find evidence of some of Ceres' torn clothes and a lot of her blood. Judging from the amount, they believe it might be possible that she was confronted with the Black Dragon Knights and killed them all, but was gravely wounded in the process and already dead somewhere else. The Black Knights were humanity's best hope against the Great Demon Empire, so losing them is a huge blow to the strength of the Holy Alliance, so the heroes from another world are even more valuable than they were before. The Emperor of Miridia Swordsit thinks it's funny how every time great evil comes, Alien always seems to benefit in some way. Vicious keeps her polite tone and asks Miridia Swordsit what he's trying to insinuate with his statement, but Miridia Swordsit is serious. Every time something bad happens, they are forced to rely on Alien and its heroes, so it's pretty convenient for Vicious. Vicious says they are all equally affected by the Dark Lord's essence, so she's on the same side as them, but she's being very passive-aggressive towards Miridia Swordsit, so he decides to stop talking before things go too far. There's one final thing that needs to be discussed before they adjourn this meeting, so the King of Magnar asks if everyone here truly believes Ceres was capable of killing all 5 of the Black Dragon Knights. It's pretty hard to believe she was capable of doing something like that on her own, and they have no idea who could have been behind it. However, a messenger comes into the room and informs him that there is a group that is taking credit for the defeat of the Black Dragon Knights, and they call themselves the Cursed Magic Users of Ashent. The next day, Touka and Sarah's are walking through town to stock up on supplies, and it doesn't look like anyone is following them, so this place might be the safest bet for their preparation. While walking, Touka notices a huge coliseum nearby, so Sarah's explains that it is a blood sport coliseum where slaves and mercenaries kill each other for the entertainment of the crowd. The fighters can earn rewards by winning their matches, and since it is run by the Duke and the Mercenary Guild, it has become a prime source of entertainment for the public, although at first it was just a way for the Mercenary Guild to assess their fighters. Sarah's and Touka later find a good inn to stay at, and since they need to conserve funds, Sarah suggests that she and Touka should share a room. Touka asks if she is really okay with that since Touka is a man and stuff might happen, but while she's embarrassed, she says she doesn't mind, so Touka gets one room for both of them. After that, they head to the bar so they can get something to eat, and the place is pretty packed, so Touka is able to overhear a conversation about the death of the Black Dragon Knights. From what he hears, it looks like people think Sarah's died at the hands of the Dragon Knights, but then the Dragon Knights were taken out by someone else. A group called the Ashen is taking credit for killing the Dragon Knights with their cursed magic, and Sarah's has heard about them before, so she tells Touka that the group apparently worships the god of curses. Just then, the Ashen walked into the bar and they are really enjoying all the clout they got from stealing credit for what Touka did. After getting a good look at them, Touka doesn't think they are actually that much of a threat, and he's not mad about them taking credit for what he did since it takes attention away from him. Touka continues to eavesdrop on the conversation going on around him, but then he hears people talking about who else they think might have been strong enough to defeat the Black Dragon Knights, and eventually the Witch of Taboos is mentioned. She's apparently a dark elf, and no one has actually seen her in a decade, but there's someone in the capital who has seen her before. Touka approaches the table and asks if the guys can tell him a little more about this person, and at first they don't want to talk to Touka, but when Touka offers to pay for their drinks, they are much more willing to talk to him. They tell them that the person who met the Witch of Taboos is the strongest fighter in the Colosseum, and he'd like to meet her, then he is probably going to have to talk to the owner of the Colosseum. However, Touka is in luck because the person in question just happened to walk into the bar. Touka goes up to her, introduces himself, but Eve immediately knows he wants something from her, so she asks him to state his business. Touka gets to the point and tells her that he would like to meet the Witch of Taboos, even admits that she has ventured into the land of the golden-eyed monsters before, but she denies ever having met the witch, but thanks to Sarah's spirits, she's able to tell that Eve is lying when she says never met the witch before. Eve asks Touka why he wants to see the Witch of Taboos, so Touka says he is just going out of curiosity, so Eve advises him to stay out of the land of the golden-eyed monsters since, to be frank, he doesn't think Touka is strong enough to survive up to 3 days there. She tells Touka that should value his life a little more, but it's a bit hypocritical coming from her, since she routinely risks her life on stage. Later, Touka is informed by Sarah's that Eve was lying, so they can guarantee that she actually knows of the whereabouts of the witch. As he returns to his hotel room, Touka realizes that he forgot to bring some food back for Pigamaru to eat, so he decides to pull out a snack he had with him when he first arrived in this world. He also gives some to Sarah's, and she has never had anything like it before, but as soon as she puts it in her mouth, she's delighted by the wonderful taste. She asks him if it is a common snack from his world, and Touka says it is, but he unfortunately can't make any more of it. For now, they need to decide what their next move is going to be, and the first thing on the agenda is finding out the location of the witch from Eve. He needs to find a way to get her to tell him, but what would be more important to her than her life? Typically, it would be money, since she buys her freedom if she has enough funds, although it requires a large sum of money. At same night, we see Eve visiting a little dark elf girl, and she promises her that she will do her best to get her out of here. Back in Touka's room, Sarah's is practicing with her spritz regalia, and it may just look like some armor with no visible boosts aside from looking cool, but I'm sure it will come in handy at some point. Once Sarah's has done training, Touka asks her if she can give him some pointers on how to handle close combat, since he has been relying on his skill a little too much lately, so he wants to be prepared if he is ever unable to use it. Sarah's understands, and she decides to train in the same way she would train one of her knights back when she was still a knight captain. She takes a step back and tells Touka to assault her, so he throws a straight punch, but Sarah's easily evades it and puts him in an arm lock. Something like this doesn't require a weapon, and it can easily be honed with a few days of training, but as she says this, she realizes she's pretty close to Touka, so she takes a step back and apologizes. Touka says it is fine since he is the one who asked her to train with him. After a long and sweaty training session, Touka is taking a bath, and Ceres is engaging in some degenerate activity with Touka's shirt. She realizes what she's doing is messed up, even if she does have feelings for Touka, and luckily it looks like no one was around to see her, except Touka, who is standing behind her this entire time. He says he noticed that his clothes were missing, so he came to look for them, and Ceres apologizes, saying that she thought it would be a good idea to wash his clothes with hers. Later that night, Ceres is asleep and Touka appraises her for how kind she is. She's diligently trying to become a sword that can protect him, and she is suppressing all kinds of down bad emotions to fulfill her role to him, so he should be grateful to her. Ceres wakes up and notices that Touka is still up, so he tells her he is just having a bit of trouble sleeping, and Ceres has a good remedy for that, so she gets out of bed and searches through her bag to retrieve some herbs. One of them helps with sleep, but the other has the opposite effect and leaves you excited and full of bedroom vigor. Of course, she doesn't intend to use it with Touka though, since he's going to be taking herbs. Touka pulls out of the soup cube from his bag and uses it to make 2 cups of soup for himself and Ceres. Touka asks Ceres to have a taste before they add the herbs, and she's amazed by how good it tastes and how all that flavor was packed into a single tiny cube. Now that she has tried it, she's going to add the sleep herb too. However, she accidentally spilled a lot more in there than she intended to. The second one has a regular amount of sleep herb in, and Ceres offers to drink the overdose cups since it was her mistake in the first place. As she and Touka drink it, they feel surprisingly refreshed, but they should be feeling sleepy, so Ceres goes to check which bauble she used, and it turns out she mixed up the excitement herbs and the sleep herbs. She sincerely apologizes to Touka, but he says it's fine, he will just read his book to keep himself busy. Ceres asked him if there are any special services she can offer him, since she is sure he is stiff as a board right now, but while Touka is certainly feeling tempted, he asks her to just get some sleep. Ceres is surprised by how resistant Touka is to temptations, but it's not like he doesn't want to, but his revenge takes priority over all else, so until he has made vicious pay, he won't be able to focus his attention on other things. In a way, it's like a curse that stops him from being happy until his goal has been achieved. However, once he is done with his revenge, he should be able to put his energy into other endeavors, so Ceres gets behind him and swears that she will do everything within her power to help Touka get his revenge, and Touka is thankful for her help. The next day, they head over to the Bloodsport Coliseum, and Ceres returns to Touka after asking around about Eve. She's pretty famous around here, and she was sold to the Coliseum as a slave, but from the very first day she got here, she was a hit with the fans, and she hasn't lost a single match yet her 3 years of fighting. Tomorrow is apparently her final fight, meaning she's already earned enough money to buy her own freedom, so trying to negotiate with her using money won't be an option anymore. Additionally, Ceres has learned that Eve already saved up enough money to buy her freedom 2 years ago, and she's now trying to buy the freedom of a small elf girl as well. There's also something Ceres is worried about because all previous Coliseum champions have all died during their final match, so it looks like there's some foul play at hand, as there are rumors that the Duke is arranging to put fighters at a disadvantage during their final fights, but Touka smiles because this may be just what they need to get Eve to trust them. The story continues. We see Eve is the undefeated champion, and she's really popular, so there's no doubt that the Coliseum management team would try to kill Eva for the publicity it would create. Ceres assumes Touka intends to stop this from happening at the main event tomorrow, but Touka doesn't see a reason to wait till tomorrow to save Eve, when he can just get it done today. Later that day, Touka corners Eve in dark alleyway and says he needs to talk with her. Eve tries to dismiss Touka and tells him she doesn't know where to find the Witch of Taboos, but Touka already knows that she's lying. He asks if Eve is trying to keep the witch's location hidden because she's indebted to the witch, but Eve denies it. However, Ceres is there as well, and she immediately calls Eve out for lying again. Eve starting gets suspicious of Touka's intentions, so she's about to draw her sword, but Touka stops her by saying he just wants to help save Eve. She asks him what he intends to save her from, so Touka explains that the Duke running the Coliseum is going to use all sorts of dirty tricks to make sure she goes down in tomorrow's match. Eve still doesn't understand why Touka would be trying to help her, but Touka just doesn't want to let his source of information on the witch die. It would be much easier to just take the girl she's trying to help and run away before the match tomorrow. Hearing this, Eve understands that Touka isn't a threat to her, but while she appreciates his warning, she can't afford to run away from the match tomorrow. Taking the girl and running is an option, but where exactly would they run to? Unless she follows the rules and buys her and the girl's freedom, then the Duke will send mercenaries to hunt her down or put bounty on her head. Maybe she'd handle life on the run if she were alone, but she has to think about the girl's safety. Touka says he knows of a place where they could escape to, and suggests that even the girl go into hiding at the place where the Witch of Taboos lives. He's sure no one would be able to find Eve there, but she says it would be impossible since no one can reach the heart of the land of monsters. Touka says they might be able to reach it if they work together, and he promises to help protect the girls to the fullest of his capabilities, but Eve doesn't think he has what it takes to follow through on that promise. She can tell that the girl with him has some amount of martial arts training, but Touka looks like a weakling to her. Touka admits that he doesn't have much skill when it comes to martial arts, but he is well versed in magic. He tells her that he can easily defeat the Skeleton King on his own, and while it's certainly an impressive feat, Eve isn't so convinced that Touka can handle the journey into the land of monsters. To prove that he is strong enough, Touka tells Eve that he's the one who killed the 5 Black Dragon Knights, but he thinks he is lying, so Touka gives her a demonstration of the power he used to kill Civet and the others. He raises his hand and casts Paralyze on Eve, leaving her frozen in place. He warns her that she shouldn't try to move too much since it could cause damage to her body if she does. This is the power they use to defeat Civet, and just in case she still doesn't believe him. Ceres reveals her true identity, proving that the rumors of her death were false, and Touka truly saved her from Civet. This should be enough to prove Touka's capabilities, so he releases Eve from the paralysis, and she's convinced that Touka wasn't lying to her earlier, but her decision hasn't changed at all. Touka sees that he's not going to be able to convince Eve, so he apologizes for disturbing her and says he hopes she finds a way to win her match tomorrow. However, if she happens to change her mind, he will be waiting at the bridge early in the morning ready to leave town. Touka then walks away with Ceres, but as they are leaving, he comes across a group of Ashant followers of the cursed god, and they are still riding the hype they got from stealing credit from Touka achievement. Their fraudulent actions annoy Ceres greatly, but Touka doesn't think there is a need to take action against them as long as they don't hurt anybody. However, as Touka and Ceres continue walking, they spot some of the cursed god cult members hurting someone. These guys are trying to kidnap this woman for unsavory reasons, so Ceres is prepared to cut them down immediately. However, Touka stops her and says he will handle it himself, so he casts one of his new spells and makes the cult members go berserk and kill one another. While they are doing that, he continues walking home with Ceres, and by the next morning and Ceres are all packed up and ready to go before the crack of dawn. It looks like Eve didn't show up after all, so Ceres asks Touka if he thinks there's a chance Eve might actually be able to win her match and earn her freedom with the little girl. Unfortunately, Touka says there's no way that will ever happen. Duke Swan is well known for his shitty ways, so Eve trusting the word of a scumbag like him can only end in catastrophe for her. Meanwhile, Eve was having trouble sleeping because of the conversation she had with Touka last night. She still believes Duke Swan will honor their agreement, but she can't shake the feelings of doubt she has, so she decides to go to the Duke's office to confirm that he will really let her go after she wins her final match. As she approaches the Duke's office, she hears him as advisor talking about the final match tomorrow and how the spectators are going to miss Eve, but of course, he plans to have her die in that match because it would be good for publicity. Eve is shocked to hear that the Duke seriously planned to betray her, but the Duke goes on to say that he has always thought of Eve as nothing more than a wild beast that became profitable. Now that she's no longer going to be useful to him, he plans to have the next champion skin her alive and wear her belt around as a new gimmick. The advisor asks what the Duke is going to do about the Dark Elf girl Eve was working so hard to take care of, and he suggests that it might be a good idea to grant her freedom as a goodwill gesture since Eve kept fighting for an additional 2 years for the Dark Elf's sake. Duke Swan says he was actually thinking of taking the Dark Elf girl in, and his advisor surprised that the Duke is actually showing compassion for once, but the Duke didn't say no, did he? He's only planning on taking her in because he has a young elf fetish, and once he's done with her, he will just sell the girl off to the nearest brothel. Eve now knows that Touka was right, and there really is no chance of being freed if she trusts the Duke, so she heads to the bridge to see if she can still take Touka up on his deal. She soon arrives at the bridge, hoping that Touka and Ceres haven't left yet, and thankfully they were still there waiting for her. Touka asks if this means Eve wishes to accept his offer, and Eve confirms it as everything he said about the Duke betraying her was true. She still has some terms to discuss about their journey to the land of monsters, but she intends to tell Touka where the witch lives. In that case, Touka is satisfied and the only thing left to do is to get the elf girl. Meanwhile, the elf girl is being put to work in the tavern, but the cruel owner comes in to start yelling at her for being so slow and useless. The elf girl tries to ignore it and keep working. Unfortunately, the owner smacks the girl until she falls to the floor in tears. The only thing that still keeps her going at this point is the promise that Eve made to free her. The owner's is failure, so she sees nothing wrong with taking down all her pent-up frustration on the girl. She even starts screaming into the girl's ears just to torture. But a few moments later, Eve busts into the room and confronts the owner. Eve knew the elf crew was being abused here, but she had no idea that gotten this bad, so she's prepared to kill the owner for all the suffering she's put the elf girl through. But the owner begins begging for her life, and says it was Duke Swan that ordered her to treat Liz so harshly. Eve still can't stand the owner, but she decides not to kill her after all. Eve takes Liz's hand and tells her that the situation has changed, so they need to leave the city immediately. Liz says she's willing to go anywhere with Eve, so Eve turns to the owner and tells her that as long as she tells the Duke she doesn't know what happened to Liz, then she will be spared. The owner begins grumbling and swears that she will do everything Eve instructed her to do, and she starts apologizing to Liz, saying she regrets all the torment she caused Liz to go through, and she even starts crying on cue really sell the apology. Liz obviously doesn't believe her, but Liz isn't the type to go for revenge, so she just lets it go and turns to leave with Eve. But as they are leaving, someone who's totally fine with revenge walks in, so Touka tells Eve and Liz to go on ahead because he has some business to take care of. Once Touka confronts the owner, he tells her to drop the act because he knows what kind of person she is. The warning begins acting smug and says it will be over for Touka and the others as soon as she tells the Duke what they've done. Unfortunately, Touka doesn't really care, he just wants to make sure scum like her doesn't get to see another sunrise. After all the horrible things she has done to Liz, he casts paralysis and poison on her, but to avoid suspicion, he decides to make it look like a robbery and stabbed a woman to death. After he is done, Touka heads back outside and goes into the sewers to meet up with Eve and the others. Eve asks Touka what he did to the woman and he doesn't give a clear answer, but he says the woman won't be able to bother Liz ever again. As she said earlier, Eve will tell Touka where to find the Witch of Taboos, but before she does, she would like to know why he wants to meet the witch in the first place. Touka explains that he has a forbidden scroll written in ancient text, and he heard that the Witch of Taboos might be able to read it. Eve just wants to confirm that Touka doesn't intend to harm the witch in any way, so he assures her that he won't start anything as long as the witch doesn't attack him. Eve is glad to hear this and says there's something else she wants to discuss with him. She's in the smartest him and can't predict people's actions like Touka can, so she would like to square her loyalty to him as her masters. Touka is surprised by the sudden leap in trust where she still barely knows him, but Eve has realized that she can't solely base her trust on how long she's known someone. Besides, she knows for a fact that Touka is a good person because he could have used any number of violent tactics to force Eve to tell him where the witch lives. He even had the option of holding Liz hostage that he chose to save her instead. The group begins their journey, but before they can escape, the Duke has already sent out a search party to capture Eve and Liz. The Duke likely enlisted the help of the Ancient cult in the hunt. Touka has to come up with a strategy to beat them, so he tells Eve to take Liz and hide deep in the forest while he and Sarah's handle the Ancient cult. The story continues. We see the cult enters the forest and spots some tracks, but the leader realizes that the tracks are too obvious, so it must be some kind of trap. He tells for the person behind this to show themselves, so Sarah's emerges from the forest with a mask on to confront them. The leader doesn't know who Sarah's is, but he's in a good mood today, so he offers her a simple deal. As long as Sarah's hands over Eve and Liz, he won't unleash the full power of the Ancient cult on her, and he claims that their power was able to take down the world's strongest human civet. In addition, he is even willing to allow Sarah's to join the ranks of the Ancient cult since he can tell that she is a skilled martial artist. Surprisingly, Sarah's agrees to his terms and says she will lead them to Eve and Liz, but the leader knows that no one ever switches sides that quickly, so Sarah's must be trying to lead them into a trap. The fact that she's trying to lead them into the forest means she must need them to be within a certain range for some sort of attack, so he tells his men to aim their bows at her and get ready to attack. She asked why they are using bows when they claim to have powerful curses, and since he intends to kill her anyway, the leader lets her in on a little secret. The Ancient cult was formed after the Assassin's Guild was exterminated by a summoned hero, and the cult just used his assassination techniques to eliminate targets, with a little bit of added poison of course. The poison is incredibly advanced and leaves no traces, so the cult is able to pass it off as it cursed to the unsuspecting masses. Furthermore, the fact that the cause of Civet's death was unknown presented the perfect opportunity for the Ancient cult to gain popularity by stealing credit for the job, and the best part is that no one can ever prove that they weren't the ones who killed Civet, so they'll never be caught. Sarah's asked why they're doing all this, so the leader tells her that they plan to use Duke Swan to carve out his central role for themselves in this nation, while also assassinating anyone who gets in their way. And speaking of people who are getting in their way, the leader asks where Sarah's allies are hiding, but she says she is the only one here to face them. The leader finds it hard to believe that she came out here intending to defeat them all by herself, but Sarah says she is confident in her ability and reveals her identity as the one who survived being hunted by Civet. It makes a lot of sense to the leader why she would be confident in her abilities, but he still doesn't believe that Sarah's could have defeated Civet. He calls out one of his subordinates named Belgar and tells Sarah's that this guy is the one who was meant to kill Eve in tomorrow's battle, and his younger brother Varregan is here as well, so together these two are the strongest members of the Ascent group. Coincidentally, they also had a younger brother named Zerash, but he was killed while chasing after Sarah's, so the brothers have a personal grudge against her. Additionally, while she was distracted, the leader has already had some of the other members of the Ascent cult circle around to cut off her escape route. Now there's a chance that she will be able to escape, so the leader tells her to give up now and submit to him, otherwise she will be killed by the poison. Sarah's does as she is told and kneels for the leader, but just when he thought he had won, Touka uses his special move to extend his range and paralyze all the members of the cult. He also already took care of all the cult members that were trying to flank them, so no one is coming to save the leader. Touka intentionally made their tracks obvious to make the leader suspicious of Sarah's, and once he felt like he had all the power, he let his guard down, and that's when Touka struck. Everything went exactly as Touka planned, so Touka asked her to go back and inform Eve and Liz that the Ascent have been taken care of. Once Sarah's has gone, Touka spots the first group in the process of retreating, so he wants to take them out and ask Pigamaru to connect with him again. Unfortunately, after all the strain he's been under, Pigamaru doesn't have the strength to transform anymore. Since Pigamaru can help him, Eve offers to lend him her assistance in taking out the remaining bounty hunters. In the meantime, Sarah's takes Liz deeper into the forest to keep her safe until the hunters have been dealt with. Touka asked Eve if she can get an accurate estimation of the number of assailants they'll be facing, and once she's figured out their number and distance, she and Touka wait for them to arrive. The bounty hunters soon spot Eve, and they intend to capture and drag her to the Duke's feet, but just before they can attack her, Touka paralyzes and poisons all the soldiers present, leaving them frozen in place. Just then, the Duke and his advisor show up on horses behind Eve and Touka, and the Duke believes he has Eve cornered, so he intends to personally kill her for having the gall to not want to die. On top of that, he will skin Eve alive and make a pair of underwear out of her hide just to be disrespectful. Touka is sick of hearing the Duke's rambling and attempts to use Paralyze to take him down, but he is shocked when he receives an error message that says he has exceeded the number of targets for Paralyzed, so he can't use that ability right now, and that means he's going to have to get creative, so he uses his darkness spell to blind the advisor, leaving him wide open for Eve to slash him in two. Touka continues doing the same thing with the rest of the soldiers, and Eve cuts them down accordingly, but a few of the soldiers are smart enough to realize they stand no chance, so they start running away. Touka tells Eve that she can't let any of them survive, so Eve grabs a spear and throws it to take out one of the fleeing soldiers. A couple of paralyzed slots have been freed up now that some soldiers have died, so Touka is almost ready to finish things off, but in the meantime Sarah's is here to keep him safe. The Duke is throwing a tantrum over the fact that his soldiers aren't capable of killing a single man, and Eve thanks Touka, because she never could have gotten the opportunity to have her revenge without him. She runs out and quickly slaughters the rest of the Duke's soldiers, and now that the Duke has no men left, he yells that he will make Eve pay for this and turns to go home, but we all know Touka wasn't going to let him leave here alive. Eve approaches the Duke, and honestly, if he had only intended to betray her, then she might have forgiven him, but for going after Liz, Eve has no mercy to give and slashes his head off. Now that everything is over, Touka asks Sarah's to take Liz and get ready to leave soon, but he has one more thing he needs to take care of. He walks over to one of the dead bodies and uses his freeze ability, and when used on a quirk it creates a layer of ice that can be shattered and completely disintegrate the body. This way Touka can eliminate all traces of the Ascent from the world, and no one will ever know what happened here. A while later, the news of the Ascent cult's disappearance reaches the king, and he is in a state of panic because he had intended to use the Ascent as pawns to accomplish his goals, but now that they are gone, how is he going to explain this to the goddess? He can afford to find out what Vicious will do to him once she finds out, so he orders his men to locate the Ascent cult as soon as possible. Back with Touka group, Liz and Eve have both gone to sleep already, so Sarah's offers to keep watch while Touka gets some sleep as well. Touka says he doesn't feel like sleeping anytime soon, so Sarah's offers to let him rest on her lap until he feels like sleeping, and he appreciates the offer, but Sarah's was pretty tired, so if anything he would like to offer his lap her to sleep in. Sarah's didn't think twice about taking him up on his offer, so she lays down on his lap, only to realize that Touka might have been joking when he made the offer. It gets a little awkward after that, but since it can't possibly get any more awkward, Touka asks if he can touch Sarah's elf ears. Sarah's is caught off guard, but she allows it, so Touka gets to feel her ears. After that's done, the two of them decide to stay up and Sarah's asks Touka if he has any special feelings towards Eve or Liz, because he's far more gentle with them than he would be with any other people. Touka explains that it's for the same reason that he likes Sarah's so much. They remind him of people whom he wants to protect. Eve reminding him of his uncle, and Liz is the same way Touka used to be when he was younger. They were both abused by the people in charge of them, and the only difference is that Liz is still kind enough to forgive those who hurt her, while Touka has no problem killing anyone and threatens him, and he doesn't intend to change the way he does things. He tells Sarah's that she's free to leave him if she ever gets tired of the life of vengeance he led, but Sarah's doesn't intend to leave him for any reason. Touka is happy to hear that she will support him, so he tells her that he will fulfill any one request of hers to the best of his ability, so when she has decided what she wants, she can ask him. For now he tells her she should get some sleep. Meanwhile, over on Alien, Ayaka is receiving some swordsmanship training down in the prison, and her instructor praises her because she's been proving a lot since they started training together, but she reminds Ayaka that she can't tell anyone about their training sessions because Vicious is so petty that she would probably forbid Nyantan from training Ayaka any longer. Ayaka asks Nyantan and why she agreed to help her train when she doesn't get anything in return, so Nyantan explains that she took a liking to Ayaka because she looks a lot like Nyantan's sister. And before she leaves she reminds Ayaka that this world is incredibly ruthless, so she can't show any weakness if she wants to survive. The next morning, Touka group is preparing to set out on their journey to the land of monsters, and Touka has brought a new dress for Liz to wear and she absolutely loves it. Before they leave, Sarah suggests they should come up with a name for their groups since they might need to identify themselves once they get to the land of monsters. She already has a name in mind and suggests that they could call themselves the Lord of Flies War Band, and everyone seems to like the name. Touka agrees to go with that. After a lot of off-screen traveling, the group eventually arrives in the land of monsters and Touka notices a giant dead tree in the distance, so Sarah explains that the tree is called the Corrupted Tree, although it used to be a sacred tree. Eve asks Touka to pour some magic into her hand, so he does, and Eve is able to pull up a magic map which was passed down to her people. It will allow them to locate the witch, so they begin the long trek to the witch's home. By nightfall, they set up camp and Touka stares off into the distance while thinking about his motivations. He may be a fool to be so sad on vengeance, but he still feels nothing but burning hatred towards Vicious and the others who abandon him, and he will annihilate any monsters he comes across to gain XP and become strong enough to get his revenge. The next morning at Alien, Vicious congratulates the heroes on leveling up, but they still lack techniques, so she's gone through the effort of gathering several famous figures to act as their instructors. Vicious tells them that the Demon Empire is definitely making a huge move soon, so she wants the heroes to participate in the battle against them, and to make sure they are ready by then, she plans to send the heroes to the land of the Golden Eye monsters to train. The story continues. We see Touka group makes their way through the land of the Golden Eye monsters. Liz offers to carry the majority of the luggage because she wants to help everyone out. The others tell her she doesn't need to carry it all by herself, but since she seems really determined to help, they respect her wishes and let her carry the bags. They continue through the forest and they suddenly sense something coming, so Touka and the others stop and take their battle stances. A monster soon appears before them and Touka thinks it looks pretty similar to one of the lizard monsters he had to face back in the ruins of Disposal, with the only difference being that it has a seaweed head. Regardless of its nature, their plan attack remains the same, so Eve engages with the monster in order to keep it distracted, and once Touka is able to get within range he uses Paralyze and Poison to take it out. Eve asks if Touka achieved what he wanted, and Touka says he is satisfied because he needed to make sure his Paralyze and Poison abilities still work on the monsters here. After facing one of the monsters here personally, Touka can say with certainty that these monsters are inferior to the ones he had to face in the ruins of Disposal, and if this is the worst this place has to offer, then getting to the witch isn't going to be a problem. Touka begins dissecting the monster, which seems a bit odd, so Sarah's asked him what he's doing, and he explains that he has seen this monster in the Forbidden before and parts of it, and apparently be used to make a forbidden item. The item is something like a voice modulator and Touka thinks it could come in handy, so he wants to make one. He sees that Ceres seems interested in the information from his forbidden book, so he tells her she can keep it for the meantime if she wants because he trusts her with it. Once Touka is done collecting his materials, the group keeps moving until they come across a large body of water. Eve and Touka are the first to cross and Liz wants to go next, so Ceres warns her to be careful not to slip on the stones. Eve thinks it would be better to just carry Liz across since she's still just a child, but Touka thinks it's better to let Liz do things on her own from time to time. Liz agrees because it's not like she's going to fall over. However, a moment later, she indeed falls over and nearly ends up in the water, but Touka sends Pigamaru to save her before that happens. Even though she ended up failing, Touka believes that what's important is that Liz has the confidence to try things by herself. Once Liz finally makes it over to the other side, she notices that Touka and Eve are talking about something that she thinks they might be making fun of her for almost falling into the river. Eve doesn't want Liz to feel self-conscious, so she makes up a lie and says they were actually talking about the kind of kids Touka and Ceres are going to have. As she says this, Ceres overhears her and loses focus, causing her to fall into the river. Once they finally get her out of the river, Ceres apologizes for letting herself get distracted like that, and she doesn't want to delay the group, so she tells Touka they don't need to wait for her clothes to dry out. Touka agrees to keep moving, but he wants to give Ceres his coat, so she doesn't end up catching a cold, and Ceres grateful for his offer. The group then continues making their way through the forest, but before long, Touka and Eve sense something up ahead, so they tell Liz to get behind them as they prepare for battle. Eve tells Touka that she recognizes these monsters and she knows for a fact that she can't beat them, so she asks Touka what they should do. Touka tells her that she should sit this one out and let him handle it on his own, so if he hides behind a tree and waits for the monsters to enter his effective range. As the monsters come into view, Touka can understand why Eve would stand no chance at defeating these things, because almost no one could beat them in a regular fight. However, Touka doesn't intend to have a normal fight, so as soon as the monster's close enough, he paralyzes them and then uses Berserk to make them bleed all over the place until they die. Once the monsters die, Touka notices that he leveled up again, but that's not important to him right now because he wants to start harvesting materials from the Nazorts. Eve looks at Touka in disgust and asks if he intends to eat that thing. Ceres interjects and explains that Touka doesn't intend to eat the monster, he's just collecting the materials because it's an ingredient in a forbidden item which will make Pigamaru stronger. Although Pigamaru is going to have to eat it, it's not going to be a fun time for him. Just then Touka and the others sense a monster nearby, but they can't pinpoint its location because no malice or hostility is being directed at them. After looking around for a bit, Pigamaru tells Touka that the monster is inside his backpack, so Touka opens it up and takes out the egg he has been carrying. It looks like it's about ready to hatch, and a few moments later it does exactly that, giving rise to a horse monster of some sort. None of them have any idea what it is since they've never seen anything like it before. While petting the horse, Touka feels something odd on its back, so he pulls back the horse's hair and finds a magical organ there. Ceres explains that most monsters have an organ like this for absorbing magic, so Touka comes up with an idea. He begins pouring his mana into the horse and hopes that will grow bigger. As he pours around 1,000 mana points, and horse transforms into a magnificent black steed. This would be perfect for luggage hauling, but the horse says Touka should keep pouring magic into it, and Touka's got nothing to lose, so he pours 10,000 mana points in, and this time the horse transforms into a buff minotaur. Touka is pleased with what he sees, so he decides to have the horse to win their group, and as such they need to give it a name. He thinks about it for a second and comes up with the name Slay, and Slay seems to really like it, so that becomes his official name. Elsewhere in the forest, Ayaka's group is busy apologizing to her because they've been nothing but dead weight this entire time, and contrast. Asasagi's group has been doing pretty well since all of the team members are pulling their weight and working well together. The same goes for Takuto's group, but he isn't really satisfied with the progress they've been making so far because the fighters that are in charge of them have been taking care of all the really dangerous monsters because they think the heroes aren't ready to handle it, and Takuto hates being underestimated. Later that night, the fighters take the heroes hunting again, but they come across an area with a group of Nazorts up ahead, and they don't think the heroes are ready to handle something like this, so they ask the heroes to stand back while they handle it themselves. Takuto doesn't like being told to wait, but as the monsters approach, Nyan says she will handle one on the right while two other fighters can handle the one on the left. They begin their attack and the Nazorts get defeated very quickly, but there are a lot more where those came from, so the fighters might need to come up with a new strategy to defeat them all. However, Takuto has already had enough of being underestimated, so he walks up to the front lines and uses his Dragonic Burst attack to incinerate all the Nazorts in one go. He then announces that his ability is only at level 4 and he has the power to cause this much destruction, so no one has the right to underestimate him, for he is the future ruler of this world. The other heroes are in awe of Takuto's power, so much so that they barely realize that Hijiri and Itsuki aren't here anymore. The two of them are elsewhere in the forest, and they came here to deal with some spies that have been following the group, but the second the spies were captured they off themselves, so they couldn't be interrogated. While all it is going on, Touka and the others have settled into an old building so they can spend the night. They've been making a lot of progress thanks to sleep, so it looks like they will arrive at the witch's house much sooner than they had expected. Sarah's asked what Touka came out here to look at, so he explains that he saw some lights coming from the forest, so he thought some monsters might be fighting down there. Sarah points out that the light is coming from the northeast, and Touka realizes that's the direction of Alien, so whatever is going on down there must have something to do with the goddess. The next morning, Eve and Sarah wake up to find that Touka isn't here anymore. Eve isn't particularly worried because she knows Touka isn't the type of person to abandon them in the middle of the land of monsters. Sarah agrees with her, so they head outside to go looking for Touka, and they don't have to look for long as Touka is sitting outside the building after having killed a massive monster. Once Touka notices them standing behind him, he greets the two and tells them that he had sensed monster nearby earlier, so he came out to take care of it, and now he's looking for the monster's body parts to see if there's anything useful in here. After Touka is done, the group continues their journey, but they eventually come across a vertical cliff, and they have no way of climbing it, so they are going to have to follow the road along the cliff instead. Sarah suggests that Touka should take a break, since he hasn't gotten any proper rest in a while, but Touka says they need to keep moving because the air is becoming humid, and he would like to get as far as possible before it starts raining. As they walk along the road, they find it odd that they haven't come across any monsters for a while now, but they just assume it must be because they are getting close to the home of the Witch of Taboos. Touka notices that Liz looks a little upset, so if he asks her if she's scared of the land of monsters, Liz tells him that this place is definitely scary, but she hasn't felt much fear since they got here, and it's all because Sarah has assured her that as long as Touka is alive he will never lose to any monsters here. Eventually they make it to an opening in the cliff, and once they pass through, they'll be really close to the witch's home. Before they head through, Eve once again wants to thank Touka for all the help he has given, since there's no way they would have been able to make it this far without him. Touka tells her there's no need to be so thankful since he mainly helped her to benefit himself anyway. Eve says she will be happy with anything as long as she and Liz are able to live a quiet life together. Maybe they could even start a farm together once they settle into their new lives, and Liz likes that idea. But a moment later, a mouth monster appears above Eve, and it's too close for Touka to use paralyzing time, so Eve turns around and slashes it down. The monster is definitely dead now, but Touka still has a bad feeling about it for some reason. His worries are confirmed when the monster lets out an ear-piercing screech and a flash of blinding light, which acts as a signal and alerts all the monsters in the area of the group's location. So now every monster in the forest is heading straight from Touka group. Their chances of survival aren't looking good against this many enemies. That brings the episode to an end. Thanks for watching. Want next part? Subscribe the channel and turn on notification bell.